Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I've got the pleasure of talking to Godfrey Bloom, and that'll probably surprise a lot of people. Godfrey joined the military in 1977 and served all the way through to, I think it was 1996. Is that right?
Well, I actually joined in 1967.
Oh, right. Okay. Wikipedia
And
got it wrong then.
I ended up in 1990 or something on the regular Army Reserve of Officers, which was another 5 years in the reserve, as it were.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you now, I have to run it up the flag post. My military career was remarkably undistinguished.
Well, I've spoke to a lot of guys on the podcast who think the same thing. And I've not spoke to anyone, I've not interviewed anyone who was in the territorials. And the only experience I've got of territorials is when they come with us on tour. And I have like a lot of respect for them. You know, they always used to be the banter, you know, they all calling them stabs and stuff like that. And there's banter between them, between the regular and the TA, but or reservists as they're called now. But all the guys I served with on tours and stuff like that were absolutely fine. You know, they've got to pass the same courses as we do. They just take longer to do the courses, that's all. So if we want to just
exactly.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, just to fill in on that point, yes, I understand there's always a love-hate relationship between the territorials and the regulars. But of course, I'm also a military historian. I'm a published military historian. And if you look at the record of some of the territorial units in the last war, you'll find that the war records of particularly the armoured units, so the Sherwood Rangers, the County of London Yeomanry, which was my original regiment, the Northamptonshire Yeomanry, so on and so forth, fought in all the major battles in North Africa and Normandy with great distinction. And just as a matter of interest, when Patton was short of armour when he was making his Third Army push, in late 1944, he asked specifically for an armoured unit, which was the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, which is a highly efficient armoured regiment. So it had got to the stage where you couldn't tell the difference. But of course, then if you look at the Second World War and indeed the Great War, it was fought in the main by civilian soldiers, wasn't it? There weren't enough regulars to fight the war, and they were all dead in the first couple of years anyway. So there really is only one army when by the time it drills down. But obviously, some territorial units can't do what the regulars can do straight off the bat. But when they've been, when they've been in a combat zone, after a while, they assume that you can't tell the difference. You won't be able to tell the difference between a territorial unit after a year or so in a combat zone, North Africa, or so on and so forth. So we love to rib each other in the regulars and the territorials. I did spend a bit of time with the regulars as well. So it's all good fun and taken in good part. And the Army is a wonderful club. Territorial, regular, doesn't matter. It's a wonderful club, one of the best clubs in the world. Or it was. It was. It's now,
Right.
of course, been completely buggered up.
Well, I was going to lead on to that after we've discussed the 5 questions. That was one of the extra questions that I've got for you. So if we could just start off with like where you grew up and what made you decide to join the territorials and start a military career.
Right. Well, I was born in 1949. My father was a fighter pilot in the war. My mother was a WAF. My godfather got a DFC on Halifax bombers. So I sort of grew up very much in a post-war military kind of environment, as it were, as most people did. You know, I wasn't unique in that, as most people did. But our next door neighbour was a destroyer captain, and so on and so forth. And I lived in a suburban area, quite a nice suburban area, and everybody did their bit in the Second War. Now, here's an interesting thing, which people find very difficult to understand today, probably, is that if you wanted a career in the city, and I started my career in the city of London in the investment world, in the 1960s, there's a few things you had to do to prove you were a proper chap. And one of them was you had to play rugger, as we called it in those days.
Yeah.
That was expected. And of course, you were expected to have some military experience of some sort. And if you bear in mind then, as a baby boomer, as it were, the senior management in the city were ex-wartime officers, and all the middle management were national service officers. And so you had to have a little bit of that experience to fit in, as it were. Now, that may sound a little bit snobby, but if you bear in mind that I was a part of Lloyd's of London, the brokerage of Lloyd's of London, whose motto is Uberima Fides, which is utmost good faith. Millions of pound deals were done on a handshake. You shook hands on it. It wasn't covered in legal contracts. You shook hands on it. And so consequently, it's not unreasonable that everybody wanted to know who everybody else was. So what was your school tie? What was your regiment? You know, do they play rugger against you, etc.? Not because of a snob thing. It was because they needed to know who they were shaking hands with. And one of the demises of the City of London now is, of course, nobody knows who anybody is. So it's full of spivs. And that wasn't the case in the 50s, 60s and 70s. The one or two spivs always are. But generally speaking, you know, a handshake was your bond. So I went into the city, and my experience, obviously with territorial, almost everybody was a territorial army person in the city. You know, it's quite extraordinary. They're all territorials. Inns of Court Squadron, SAS, Artist Rifles, County of London Yeomanry, so on and so forth. So it was very natural then to have some form of military association. That's not true today. Of course, it's not true today. We understand that. But then it was, and it certainly worked. So it was territorial army and the city, and the two things were flip sides of the same coin.
I mean, there's a lot of people in the Honourable Artillery Company who work in the city. You know, that's from the experience that I've had, the guys who I've met from there.
That's right.
I once drove them for one weekend when I was down at Larkhill. They came down for the weekend, jumped in a Warrior. They were in a turret talking. I'm driving it, listening to discussing their bonuses. And I nearly passed out listening to the numbers they were mentioning. I piled the brakes on very quickly, and they both nearly flew out the turret. So yeah. So there's quite, you know, there is with the Honourable Artillery Company. It's still happening. You know, the guys who are mainly in that are working in the city and stuff like that. Yeah. So what made you, I mean, apart from that, did you have a choice of what tier unit you wanted to go to, and why did you pick the one you did?
Well, I went into the County of London Yeomanry, which was the obvious choice for somebody who was at Lloyd's of London. Had I been a lawyer, I'd have gone into the Inns of Court Squadron, you know, etc., etc. Had I been mentally short in my head, I'd have gone into the Artist Rifles, which of course are TA SAS. But fortunately, I'm a well-balanced individual and didn't need that. So that's really what you did. And I did apply at some stage, I think it was, for attachment to a regular unit. And I did some time with a regular unit, 18 months or something, which was encouraged in those by your employer. Your employer encouraged you to do that kind of thing then, because they knew they were actually getting good training. The army would train you properly, and that was good in a leadership role if you were marked for high office in the city. So everybody was scratching each other's back. So it was a natural thing. Now you have to be sent on courses to Ashridge management course and stuff like that, which I've also done. But you learn a damn sight more in the army than you do on any management course. And of course, the other thing was in the territorial army. I think it's changed probably now, but you had to do 2 or 3 years as a private soldier. You didn't float in as an officer, and of course you learnt a heck of a lot if you were a private soldier as well. You know, mucking in with blokes and the men, and I was commissioned and gazetted actually into the 3rd Battalion, the Worcester Foresters, and they were miners. They were mainly miners, and so consequently. You had to bill it with them as an officer, or not bill it with them, but serve as a private soldier with them, and you soon learned how many beans made 5, especially with my accent in a Nottinghamshire mining regiment.
Talk about chalk and cheese, yeah. So how did you find going to like Sandhurst to do the commissioning course and stuff like that?
Well, yes, I went to Sandhurst. What you did in those days, I don't know what goes on now, but I think you spent a year as an officer cadet with your regiment, and you did all sorts of external courses to bring you up to speed so that when you actually got to Sandhurst, you didn't make a goat of yourself. Well, of course, I got chucked out of Sandhurst in my first year. They chucked me out because, rather unfairly, I thought, as I say, I was a military historian then. I was published in the mid-1980s in the Army Review, so I consider myself to be a reasonably plausible military historian, although not a particularly plausible soldier. But so I was a military historian. Anyway, they were singing the praise of Sir Douglas Haig in the Great War, which is my specialist subject, and this, that, and the other. And I took a contrary view in the lecture halls sometimes on matters which I knew more than the lecture very often. I didn't realize the army then didn't encourage counterintuitive thinking. So they slung me out till I was too gobby, which is perfectly fair, and I was. And my commanding officer said, right, go back, keep your gob shut. And I did. And in Sandhurst, as you probably know, if you pass, there's a red line. There's all the list of all the officer cadets. And there's a red line they draw at the end of it all. There's a red line. And if you're above the red line, you've passed. And if you're below the red line, you've failed. My name sat just on the red line. And I went to see the commandant at Victory College, who'd got an MC in Ireland or something, top sort of chap.
Yeah.
And he said, we were all terrified that if we failed you again, you'd come back for the third time, and we just can't handle that. So fuck off, and good luck with it. And so that was that was really the my military career in a nutshell, I'm afraid.
I mean, that's just made me chuckle, as you can tell. So serving with your with the regular units now, what's the experiences you had of that? How did they treat you, knowing that you were like territorial?
Well, in those days, it wasn't particularly apparent that you were territorial, because by that stage I was in logistics, transport, the 4th Armoured Division. So consequently, you either did the job or you didn't do the job. It wasn't, nobody had time to make any sort of assessment of your regiment or your unit, other than the fact that if you had done your job, nobody was bloody interested, which made it an effective exercise. Because if you go into combat, nobody's interested. They just want to know if you can do your job.
Yeah.
One that was an interesting little thing, I was in charge of unloading an ammunition train. This was in Germany somewhere. And the rail tracks went to a point so that you could only unload, one carriage at a time, or one wagon at a time of ammunition. And being a territorial, I came at things from a slightly bigger business perspective, a broader view, if you will. Now, the regulars had better kit. Their mechanical handling kit was much better than ours, quicker than ours, but we had some aces up our sleeve. We had, for example, a couple of corporals in 219 Squadron, RCT as it was in those days, who were mechanical, who were, forklift truck drivers for a living.
Yeah.
For a living. So they worked in warehouses all day long, every day, 50 weeks a year, handling these things. No regular soldier could come anywhere near them for that, because they could make these things sing. And I still remember these guys. And I was the squadron commander, and I could see it was going to take us a hell of a long time to unload if we could only go to the the narrow bit of the rails. It was going to take us all night to unload this train, one carriage at a time, one wagon at a time. So I moved the train. I fixed it to move the train. So we turned the train round, which was much, much easier and quicker than trying to unload one wagon at a time in that restricted space. And when the brigadier did his inspection, he said, you've beaten your opposite number, your regular unit, which I think was 60 RCT or something, or 20. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You unloaded it in 2 hours under what they did. And that's a regular unit. This is impossible. He said, Major Bloom, this is impossible. I'm going to investigate it. He said, I'm not suggesting there's anything untoward here. It's just, it just can't be done. It couldn't be done. It can't be done. Anyway, it was age. I let him sweat on it for a bit, and anyway, he turned up about 2 hours later, and he said, "Major Bloom, you moved the train, didn't you?" I said, "Yes." And he said, he looked at me. I said, "If we were in combat and the bogeymen were coming at us from Moscow, I would have changed the train, and it would have been done quicker. So did I do the right thing, or did I do the wrong thing?" And he said, "Well, of course you did the right thing. You unloaded it in half the time." And I've always found a little bit of difference when, and I think regulars, I have a lot of friends in the regular army, I used to have, who served in the Middle East or places or whatever it happened to be, or Afghanistan. The territorial soldier he'd be older very often. He'd be older, and he'd bring something to the party. Now, we weren't better than a regular unit. We were just different in some aspects of what we did. And when you soldier together for a bit, you understand that the other man's strengths and weaknesses. And we had weaknesses in the territorial army. For example, the officer corps outside the better regiments was weak. The NCOs were very strong. So you get these guys driving trucks who drove huge trucks to Turkey and back in civilian life. They became the sergeants in territorial transport units. They were shit hot. The officer corps was slightly weaker, and I'll tell you for why. It was slightly weaker because in order to be if you want to get to be a squadron commander or whatever it is in a territorial army unit, you have to devote more time to the army. And that means if you can devote more time to the army, it means you're not so senior by definition in your civilian job, which means you're not getting the best brains. You're not necessarily getting the best people if they can spare that amount of time. It's by definition. So your NCOs were very good. Your soldiers were pretty good because they were miners and they were used to hands-on jobs like that. Very good. Your officers sometimes were rather weaker, and I can say that now because I'm a long time gone.
So what made you? I mean, that was just the end of your time in 1996. So that was the end of your career in the military.
That's right.
And then you decided to go into politics.
Well, basically, my career was in the city as an investment manager, and that was well over 35 years. So basically, I am a city man, a city investment man. That's what I do. Now, I didn't go into politics until 2004, because I wanted Brexit. I wanted to leave the European Union. I'd never had anything to do with politics at all before. I wasn't interested in party politics, and I'm still not. But in order to help that fight, I decided that I would go into politics, and I was in politics for 10 years as a member of the European Parliament for Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire. And so that's what I did. But I didn't particularly want to go into politics per se, and for the simple reason that 99.9% of politicians are corrupt and stupid. And I don't care what label they carry. I don't care whether it's blue, I don't care whether it's red, yellow, whatever it is. They are a particularly poor genre of people that I know. I was in the game for 10 years. Now, you worked in those days in the army, or you worked in the city. I was used to dealing with top draw people. And when you get into politics, you're just looking to people with an eye to the main chance. They're not very nice. None of them are very nice. They're nearly all dishonest.
I mean, I find the current state of, the current state of the UK, the politics, and I've never been interested in politics, but I think everyone should be now. Slightly, keeping an eye on stuff. I think the governments have got, it's that old adage, oh, the government before them was even worse. The government before them was even worse. I can't tell. And like I say, I'm not a political guy. I'm probably a little bit right of centre in my thinking, but, more of a centralist than anything, really. I mean, I haven't got the experience. But I can't tell the difference between Labour and Conservative or Liberal anymore, to me. they're just all the same. We have, as a country, I think we've just lost complete trust in whatever government's in there. It feels as though they just don't give a shit about us anymore. They're trying to progress their own values, their own career. If you know what I mean. If, that might be a bit harsh in thinking that. I don't know, but it's just the way I feel, and I think a lot of people feel at the moment. I mean,
Well,
what's
you're
your
quite
view on
right.
the current state?
You're quite right. You can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference between any of them.
No.
Some are just a bit worse than others. So we have this problem called the World Economic Forum, and part of that cabal is the United Nations, the World Health Organization, all these international global organizations, which have nothing to do with democracy or nationalism or countries and all this. What we do now is we have a Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who was quite open when he was interviewed by Emily Maitland on the BBC 14 months ago. I said, what matters most? Is it Davos? He was at Davos. Is it Davos or is it Parliament? And it's easily found. It's easily looked up on the clip, and most of your people will probably know it. He said, oh, Davos. He was quite honest and upfront. He believes that his responsibility is to the global cabal, the George Soroses of this world, the Klaus Schwabs, etc., etc. He said so. It's not my estimate of what he does. He said so. He's also sponsored by various people like BlackRock and so on and so forth. So these big international companies with massive budgets buy and sell politicians for pennies, and his predecessor was ex-Goldman Sachs, Sunak. These people have no loyalty whatsoever to the country, to Great Britain, to a constitutional democracy, an institutional monarchy. They don't believe in any of this. They don't believe in any of this. What they believe is in global government and what can they take out of that for themselves and their families. That's coming out now in spades with Keir Starmer. It appears that everybody has been spending money, sending money to Keir Starmer for spectacles, for clothes, and the other senior members of the Labour Party, dresses, apartments, so on and so forth. They're all on the take. They're on the take. Yeah. Now, the thing is with the Conservative Party, in all fairness, the Conservative Party are very much cleverer. They're all on the take as well, but it's much more difficult to find.
I suppose Labour's a bit more open then. I mean, it's. I think since they've got Labour going to power.
Say hello to Frankie, and then bugger off.
What I was going to say there, I think since Labour got into power, and I still don't understand how they did, but
let me just pick up on that. Let me pick up on that, Frankie, because a lot of people aren't really just joining the dots on that one.
Yeah.
What happened? The Labour vote only went up 2%. It only went up 2%. What actually happened? The reason they got a big majority was because nobody turned out for the Conservative Party, and why would you? It wasn't Conservative anymore. The Conservative Party was just New Labour. And people said, oh, no, thank you. More tax, the highest taxation rate since the war. They weren't conservative. They don't believe in conservative values. They didn't believe in the principles of English law. They don't believe in anything. And that was a Conservative Party. And so what happened is nobody turned out for the Conservative Party. Why would you? And that's how Labour got there. It wasn't like everybody suddenly thought, oh, Labour's great, let's vote Labour. Yeah. It didn't happen at all. Didn't happen at all. And of course, the spin-off for that is people who vote Lib Dem, who say, oh, plague on all their houses, I'm voting Lib Dem. Now, your average member of the British electorate is also extremely stupid. So he thinks that the Lib Dems are a protest vote. The Lib Dems are slightly to the left of the Labour Party. And I know perfectly sensible people saying, I'm going to vote Lib Dem this time. And I'm going, have you read their manifesto? Are you mad? But, trouble is with people in this country and North America is the same. I've done a lot of work there. Is they don't really pay very much into they're so busy living lives of quiet desperation, poor bastards, that they glance at the TV, when they're cooking their tea or something, and they still all feel the same. They're all a bunch of crooks and spivs, which they are, but they don't drill down and find out why and what's going on. What do these people stand for? And that's really the problem that we have these days, that people don't take an interest in politics and then surprised when they've got the mafia sitting there at number 10 Downing Street. Yeah, bring it on themselves, don't they?
Do you think because of this current state of politics, it's just given rise to populism? And do you think that could be a dangerous thing? Because I mean, oh Christ, I want to put this. And again, like I say, I'm not really into politics and all that, but I think most people, and it's shocking in itself that most people's opinions are now formed on social media, and they're getting their information from there. Places like, I mean, fuck me, it could be somebody could end up in government because they've got a TikTok video. That's that type of thing. I looked up populism the other day, and there's a list of like populist movements in different countries and stuff like that. So I went straight to the UK one, and I was shocked at two of the names on there. So I suppose one of them, yeah, in the list of them, one was fucking Corbyn, which was, yeah, all right, fair enough. But the other one was the floppy-haired idiot from the Conservatives. I don't even like to mention his name anymore. And he was classed as a populist. Fucking Boris Johnson. How? You know what I mean?
Well,
That's just
yeah, you see, but who wrote what you looked up?
It was off a Wikipedia article, so it could have been anyone really, yeah.
Yeah, there'll be a political angle. Wikipedia, for example, is heavily, heavily edited. There's stuff on Wikipedia about me which is a lie. It's untrue. I spent thousands of pounds trying to get it all removed off Wikipedia with no success at all, because they say, no, we don't have any editing. You can't get at us because we didn't edit it. Yes, they do. They edit, they're crooks. If you start from base camp, everybody in the political game is a crook, right? That is base camp. Right. And when you say, what is populism? They're trying to turn populism into a dirty word. We live in a democracy. The whole bloody idea of a democracy is you vote for the popular guy because he's a popular guy because he represents what you believe. That's democracy. But now, of course, everybody's saying they don't want mass immigration. Let's take mass immigration. Most people are against mass immigration. That's populism. That's bad. That's bad populism. Who says it's bad populism? The people who want mass immigration. Oh, somebody wants to cut government spending, for example, government borrowing. Oh, that's populism. That's bad. Well, if you don't do that, how are you going to cut tax and stop inflation? You can't. So everybody's got an angle. Everybody's a crook. And when it comes to your media, let's take your media. 5 international organizations own nearly 90% of the media. The BBC is a mouthpiece for government, left-wing governments. Everybody at the BBC.
So you've always been quite outspoken about the UK military and defence and the way they threatened the state of the military in the UK. What's your thoughts on the current climate that we're in at the moment, with reference, let's say, the size of I wouldn't even call it an army anymore, our defence force, let's say, it's that small. I think it's the smallest it's been since like Waterloo, before Waterloo type of thing or something.
Oh, well, that's right. The army now is very small, indeed. But that's not quite the point. Well, it is the point up to an extent. They have, and this was started happening in the 1980s. The army, the British Army, started to believe that it should be reflective of British society as a whole, in the same way that the powers that be think the police force should be, or the police service should be, reflective of the population as a whole. That doesn't work with the army. It doesn't work with the army. Now, with the army, you have to recruit and train your army in the light and reflection of your foeman, of the enemy, not the man on the Clapham omnibus. That'll get you nowhere. So if the Russians and Chinese are training traditionally, making hard cases, hard nuts in order to kill people, which is what soldiering is about. It's about killing the other bloke en masse. and winning battles. Not very nice. There we are. Not very soft and cuddly, but that's the name of the game. Now, if you train your people in a namby-pamby, diversity, limp-wristed fashion, you're going to lose when you come up against a Muscovite with a Kalashnikov rifle in one hand and a half-eaten baby in the other. He's going to mince you. You've got to be as hard and as tough as he is. And if you're not, you'll lose. So we have now had a whole generation, I would argue, a whole generation, let's say 25 years, of the army being softened down, with LBGT, PD, QED, all that bollocks. It's all bollocks. You need to train an army to be tough, to beat the foeman, not to reflect life at the BBC or a bank or any other namby-pamby institution that we seem to have these days. If you don't do that, you'll lose. And it's the same with the Air Force. You have to train hard. The same with the Royal Navy. Oh, let's reach out. Let's have women on board. Let's do this. Let's do that. That isn't the point. It's your enemy that you need to be equal to. You don't want to reflect society. Reflecting British society at the moment is a mistake because British society is crap, falling to pieces. British society is falling to pieces. You certainly can't model an army on it. So that's all ludicrous. So, yeah, the army is not only tiny, it's soft, but it goes further than that. This is the problem that we have. We have very bellicose politicians. We have bellicose Conservative, bellicose Labour Party. It's absolutely quite astonishing, isn't it? We seem to be poking the bear, the Russian bear. We seem to want a war with nothing whatsoever to fight with. We have no serious army, not much bigger than a defence force. It's tiny. The Navy isn't fit for purpose. The Air Force is actually quite small, some of which isn't fit for purpose, and certainly isn't up to speed of a conventional integrated war unit, which is what the Russian Federation now is. So there's no point in pretending that we could fight a war, even if we want to. We could triple the size of the army, triple the size of the Air Force, triple the size of the Navy. We would still not be in a position to take on the Russian Federation, which are now battle-hardened. And the trouble is with politicians, they do not understand the difference between a peacetime army and a wartime army. The Russian Federation have spent 3 years learning their trade. They're shit hot. Now, the way to avoid a war with them is to not keep poking them. If there's a big muscular bloke in the bar at the other end, stop trying to flirt with his girlfriend or stop trying to take the piss out of him because he's going to take you into the car park and give you a smacking. And that's just the same. You can get to nationalities, individuals, it doesn't matter. We have no strategic quarrel with the Russian Federation at all. Ukraine is nothing to us. Nothing to us at all. In 1914, we fought a war in 1914, which was nothing to do with us. It broke the British Empire and it cost us 3 million casualties, British Empire casualties. Yeah. Nobody to this day knows why we fought that war. So let's stop this warfare, this desire for warfare all the time. No good can conceivably come of it. So there's no point in the shadow defense minister of the Conservatives saying, oh, we've got to step up to 2% of GDP for our budget, for our, for our army and our air force, for our armed services, so on and so on. It's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. The Americans are no better. The American army hasn't been fit for purpose for years and years and years. I served with them, bless them. That's just a waste of time. They've got some wonderful, great big aircraft carriers, which I said in an article I wrote for Going Postal when we launched our 2 aircraft carriers. You can sink them in 2 minutes with hypersonic missiles. It's over. It's yesterday's weapon. They've been redundant since Okinawa. And yet we've spent billions and billions when we should have been spending them on drones and hypersonic missiles if we wanted to be up to speed. We've missed the boat.
Or pages.
Yeah. If you're a real psycho, if you're a real psycho nation, sell detonating phones to women, children, nurses and doctors in the Lebanon if you've really lost the bloody plot. And they've got something nasty coming down the road because the world is going to put up with that kind of behavior for very long. But what we need to do, I'm a peacenik. I'm not a pacifist, But most soldiers underneath are pacifists, because soldiers know something about war. Politicians don't understand war. War is nasty. War is about soldiers getting their legs blown off and blinded. War is a very, very bad thing. And the only time you need to have a war is if somebody's actually marching up Pall Mall or landing on the Isle of Bloody White. Then you have to fight. But you have to go the other side of the world to fight somebody else's battle.
And every conflict I've been involved with, and that sounds glorified almost just by saying that, but none of it was on British soil. Northern Ireland wasn't a conflict. We were there doing internal security. First Gulf War and Second Gulf War. First Gulf War, kind of agree with. Although it was all about oil again. We were trying to protect Kuwait or whatever. That's the way it was sold to us. The Second Gulf War, 2003, Optelic. I still don't know why we were there, but I'm proud of what we did. I'm proud of the job I did. I went to war. I did what I was trying to do for years and years and years. And the pinnacle of what you achieve as a soldier is going to war. It's the highest fucking thing you can do, really. You're doing your job. But I don't agree with us, especially afterwards when it all comes out, the fucking Blair and everything and Bush and whatever you want to call them. That it caused too much. It caused far too much death and destruction all them years afterwards, and I think them two should be held to account. To account for it. It wasn't
entirely agree.
We were told. We were there doing our job, and I'm proud of what we did. I've got medals on the wall, that I earned. We lost lots of good people afterwards. It was just a fucking waste of time. It really, really was. I've likened it in other podcasts that I've spoken to guys with. I've kind of likened it to almost like our Vietnam. It was an unpopular war, and it didn't need to happen in reality. But we just do as we're told. And I know that's like a get out of jail free speech, and it didn't work for all the Nazis and stuff like that. But we just did as we were told, but we did it to the best of our ability. And, that's all I can say really on that subject.
Well, I agree. I'm totally anti-war. No good ever comes on it. I've written more essays, and I'm a graduate of the Royal College of Defence Studies. I've analysed war from an historical perspective. Some wars you have to fight. We had to fight the Falklands War. A bunch of bloody, fascists from Argentina leapt on a crown colony, and they had to be kicked off, and rightly so. But most of the wars we get involved in, no point at all. War of the Spanish Succession. What was that all about? Well, the Napoleonic Wars, what was that about? The 1812 Anglo-American War, the 1914, the Boer War. What the bloody hell was that all about? Waste of time, money, and lives.
Yeah, rich people getting richer.
Yeah, as always, follow the money.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to. I'm kind of biased about the Ukraine thing, in such that it's kind of touched my life in that my current girlfriend is from Ukraine. So I wouldn't say I'm biased, against the Russians, pro-Ukrainian. If that finishes, she goes home. What do I do? But I agree with what you said about poking the bear. I don't know enough about why Putin really, really wants to do it, apart from the fact that we've got too close to his borders as NATO.
Well, yeah, this is the problem, Frankie, isn't it? Mainstream media have not told the truth about the war in the Ukraine. They're still lying about it. When I was in the army, NATO was a defensive organization. It was a defensive organization for Western Europe against the Soviet Union, which was an evil regime. Now, in 2014, you can go back further than this, but in 2014, the CIA destabilized the elected Ukrainian government in 2014 and put their people in, and wanted the Ukraine to become part of NATO. Now, the Ukrainian border is 1,500 meters long, and its closest point to Moscow is 800 miles. And the Russian Federation were very, very clear on this. They said, we will not accept any further encroachment of NATO. And what does NATO mean? NATO means American forces. We will not accept nuclear missiles on the border 800 miles away of Moscow, sponsored by America, run by America, guided by America. America didn't put up with it in Cuba. We certainly wouldn't have put up with it if the Russians were trying to put missiles in Southern Ireland, so on and so forth. The strategic case of the Russians fighting back against this concept is quite right. They are quite right. Now, they said there was a peace deal on the table in Turkey in April 2002, and they said, look, we're going to withdraw all our forces. What we want is you to guarantee the protection of ethnic Russians in the Donbass. It was a very generous offer. The Russians did not want this war to escalate. They didn't want it to happen. And they came to a good deal. Now, Boris Johnson flew out and cancelled the agreement at the behest of Washington. He said, right, no, we're not going to have a peace deal. We're going to go on and we're going to win, and we're going to give you any amount of weapons that you need. And the Russian Federation has said, no, we're not going to put up with that. We're not going to have the members of NATO. It's an existential threat to the Russian Federation. It's got nothing to do with America at all. It's the other side of the world to America. It's nothing to do with us. Why are we fighting this bloody stupid war? And we have lost around about 500,000 or 600,000 young Ukrainian soldiers, about half that young Russian soldiers. To what end? And I'll tell you to what end is because the big business want to take over the resources of the Ukraine, which are big, and the resources of a broken up Russian Federation. This war is a disgrace and it's shameful. And Starmer wants to put long-range missiles, Storm Shadows, into the Ukraine to strike at the heart of Russian cities. Is he mad? Is he a lunatic? Even when he was in Washington, the Pentagon, the representative of the Pentagon said, this guy Starmer's mad. Do you want World War III? Does anybody watching this clip want World War III? Do they? Do you, watching this clip, I ask you, do you want World War III? Because if you do, you're a bloody moron. It's not worth it. We want peace. Let's have a neutral Ukraine with no American missiles in it, no Russian missiles in it, a neutral Ukraine. And if you say this can't be done, have a look at Austria. Yeah. Austria is a neutral state and has been since the war. Austria is not a member of NATO. It has no Russian troops. It has no Soviet troops there. It's a buffer state, Austria, as indeed the Ukraine should be. How many more wars do we need which are going to end in failure? This one has already failed. It's already failed. It's already over. And Trump has said that as soon as he gets elected, if he gets elected, he's out again, as the Americans always depart, as they departed Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, Libya, which they buggered up, everything else. But of course, the problem, as we know, as ex-military ourselves, it's as nobody is bloodthirsty and military as your civilian who knows he can stay safe at home.
Yeah.
So I know that I have Ukrainian friends myself, incidentally. A very nice, a very lovely people. They have an evil regime, but that's not reflected over the people, because the people they voted for wanted peace with Russia. That's who they voted for, which was destabilized in 2014. But you won't find this in any mainstream media, because the mainstream media toes the Washington line. You get what Washington think all the time, what the government think. You will not have seen a single rational debate on this war and the cause of this war on mainstream TV. So your man on the Clapham omnibus, your Joe Sixpack, hasn't got any information about this war at all. It's big bad Putin. Putin's an evil man. Putin this, Putin that. Bullshit. It's bullshit. And as soon as we actually wake up to this, the better it'll all be. All he wants is a neutral Ukraine with no American missiles in it. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Well, I mean, the two things I understand or I've learned about it was, one, that there was a treaty written where Ukraine agreed to hand back all the nuclear weapons as long as they stayed out of this and stayed out of NATO, and everyone would have been happy. And they didn't. Or they've encroached on areas that shouldn't have. In the Donbass area, I mean, that's where my girlfriend's from. And I said to her when first, I didn't really want to talk about it because, it's a bit raw for her and stuff like that. But we ended up talking. And I said, so what happened? Did they come in and flatten the city and stuff like that? And she said, no, everything's fine there. They just walked in and went, hello, we're Russian, put a flag up. And 99% of the people in that area went, yeah, great. We're Russian as well. And because they don't, her and a few others don't identify as Russian, even though they were brought up that way, they speak Russian over Ukrainian, they left. But the area they're in, Melitopol, they want to be under Russian rule. And that doesn't get mentioned in the media as well. So a majority of people in the Donbass area want to be under Russian rule.
It's because of the protection that the Russian Federation can offer them. What is never talked about is post 2014, 14,000 ethnic Russians in the eastern Donbass were murdered by the Nazis in the western Ukraine, and that's what they are. They've got SS badges. I mean, what do I do? Paint a bleeding picture for it? They're bad people, and they murdered 14,000 with artillery pieces and all sorts of things. And in the end, the Russians said, "Just a minute, just a minute. We can't allow this to continue." And at the negotiation table in Turkey in April 2022, part of that was a genuine protection for Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the eastern Donbass. It was signed, sealed, and delivered, and torn up by Boris Johnson at the behest of Washington, who's now the editor-in-chief of the Daily Telegraph. Boris bloody Johnson. So we're going to get more and more bullshit from the national press, more and more cheating on TV, but it can only end one way, because the Russian Federation have been boxed in. They've got nowhere to go except Kiev. They don't want to go. They don't want a war. They're not interested in a war. Who wants to take over a corrupt shithole like the Western Ukraine? It's awful, dreadful. So they don't want that. But what are they going to do? They cannot have American missiles on their border 800 miles from Moscow, and they're not going to have it. They're not going to allow it. And the sooner we always wake up to that fact, the more lives we can save.
I mean, is the answer? I mean, the answer to me. I mean, again, I'm just an old, fat, bloody old veteran sat in Northumberland. But the answer for me would be to draw a line where they are now, down that river, and keep the Donbass area as either a buffer zone, a neutral state, their own state, or incorporate it into Russia. Because the way I understand it, the people who live there want to be under the Russian Federation. So why not allow it? Then it stops. They don't have to. We don't have to move into the area. I mean, where they say there's no NATO troops on the ground and stuff like that. Really?
Oh, come on.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to. This isn't the place to probably talk about that, but yeah, come on. We're not stupid. Even if it's just training. I mean, I can understand, the guys, the Ukrainians want to fight. It's their country. They feel as though they're being invaded. We're enabling that. It's hard. I don't have an answer for it. The only answer I could think of would be that, like I say, we draw a line down that river, and then just say everything.
Basically, that was on offer 2 years ago. It's not on offer now, because the Russian Federation will not trust NATO and Washington, and they're right, aren't they? You can't trust these buggers in Washington. They're untrustworthy. Everything they say is a lie. And let's just remember Angela Merkel's speech of last year, when she said, we did not negotiate with the Russian Federation in a genuine way. We wanted to refurbish the Ukrainian army, so we filibustered and waited until we could do it. How can the Russians trust anything these comedians in Washington say? They're gangsters and crooks, and they're all in the pay of the industrial military complex. They're all being paid for. The houses in Washington, I visit Washington quite a lot. You have the houses and the swimming pools. All the congressmen from humble backgrounds are now multimillionaires. Who do you think pays? Big Pharma and big business, military business. Yeah, I've been there. I've been there any number of times. I've got friends there. I lecture there sometimes. I've lectured at the Eisenhower University, military university. I've lectured at these places. I know these people. I was at the RCDS with these people. I'm not the man at the golf club who read the Daily Express.
But as soon as you mention anything like this, you're all of a sudden labelled conspiracy theory. You know, it's all bollocks. It's all, you know. My boss at work has always got a good thing. He says, you know, he always says politics. Look over there, don't look over here. Look over there, don't look at what's actually happening. And that's what's happened. You know, that's why we don't trust politicians anymore.
You can't.
Yeah. I mean, another question I'd ask about fear, and not on Ukraine or anything like that, but I mean, you were a member of European Parliament. Is there any point to having a European Parliament? Does it actually can it control everything? You know, and then do we lead on to having a European army?
Well, let me just explain this, because I don't think many people would understand it, and why would they? The European Parliament is an observational and amending chamber. It does not create the law. The Commission creates the law, and it goes to the European Parliament in much the same way as our law passed in Parliament goes to the House of Lords.
Right.
It's for debate and so that, with very limited power. The House of Lords has relatively limited power. The Parliament, the European Parliament, has very limited power. It can't do anything. It can't initiate anything. So it's a veneer of democracy, so that people, when they vote at European elections, feel that they have some say in what goes on. It's a con. The whole thing's a con. And it's full of MEPs who got a big salary from leaving the job that they had before. I must have been the only single MEP who took a huge salary dive for becoming an MEP. Everybody else was getting a step up in their way of life. I took a big step down because I was a successful city man. And so I didn't do it for the money. In fact, I didn't take the salary at all. I didn't take the salary, I didn't take the freebies, and I gave attendance allowances to Yorkshire charities. It's all on record. I won't go down that because it's too long ago and it's not worth it. But the whole thing is a great con, and it's run by the Commission, and the Commission are in the pockets of the World Economic Forum. Your Ursula or Big Pharma. Look at Ursula von der Leyen, for example. She's married to a very senior Big Pharma executive. This is bullshit. And you won't hear any of this, of course, will you, on TV? And just going back to Ukraine, why aren't we allowed to watch RT, Russia Today? Why can't we watch, in a free society, any TV or radio channel that we want? We're being cut off for any information. We can only believe what the government tell us. That the Ministry of Truth, and if you read George Orwell, it's the Ministry of Truth, which means it's the Ministry of Lies, and that's all we're getting. The problem that we have is your man on the Clapham omnibus, your man in the pub who's read the Daily Express, is easily wound up because he's basically ignorant, he's kept in the dark, and he's wound up every now and again with this propaganda. We haven't seen propaganda like this, Frankie, since the Northcote Press in 1914 and the bayoneting of babies in Belgium, and let's get to the colours and let's all join the army and fight the Germans. Nothing to do with us at all. But everybody was wound up. They were marching and they were doing this and doing that, getting wound up. It's very easy to wind up people in the pub, especially if they've had a beer or two, and that Putin's a bad man and we've got to do this. But if they're asked to get it, it's like immigration, isn't it? Oh, we've got to let immigrants in. We've got to do this, do that. Say, how many immigrants can you put up in your house? Well, the answer is none. Nobody says, oh, well, I've got a spare room, do they? Nobody ever says, I've got a spare bedroom, do they?
No.
There's always a wonderful reason. Are you going to go to war? Do you want your son to join the army and go and fight in the Ukraine? Oh, no. No. The whole thing, the whole thing is built on bullshit. And the ignorance of your ordinary Joe. And I'm not blaming your ordinary Joe for being ignorant. It's very difficult if all he listens to is mainstream media, which is owned and controlled by the establishment.
And like I say, as soon as you start looking outside of that and you start looking at, so, you know, you go on Telegram, you read things on there, you read things online, you look at what's not the mainstream media, you are then like, you're a conspiracy theorist. And you're not. You just, I'm guilty of it myself. I'll see someone post something and I'll think, I never thought he'd think that like that. And why is he thinking like that? He must be a conspiracy theorist. Or, I'm not talking flat earthers because they're fucking idiots. But people who are, I wouldn't say they're pro-Russian, but they're not anti-Russian. They've. I spoke to a guy called Tim Davies a few months back, and he's very much along the lines of yourself. And he put it that we can have a conversation of two sides. With a lot of people, you can't have a conversation of two sides. So they'll, like you say, they think Putin bad, Russia bad, and Russians aren't bad. They're just people. It's just another country, you know. And it's the way like you say, it's the way the media portrays it, and we don't have any other information to simulate in our own mind to say whether it's right or wrong. So to us, it's all wrong, and I'm guilty of that. I am that. I am that grebe on the bus.
Well,
Who's just
you'll
fed
know
into it.
about these things, Frankie, because what you know about is the army. You know
Yeah.
about the army, and over the years, whenever you looked at whether it was Iraq or wherever it was, when you looked at the TV news, you'd go, "That isn't true. That isn't true. That's wrong." Because because you're in the army. So when they say we've got this, and we've got that, and we've got a division, and you said, no, we haven't. We could probably field today 2 operational brigades at most. Yeah. And we are poking a nation which has hundreds upon hundreds of brigades, all fully equipped and combat trained. But how does Keir Starmer know about this? He's never been in the army. He doesn't understand anything. He's clearly a sociopath. When you see he was interviewed by Laura Cheeseburger the other day on the BBC, if you remember, saying, what do you think people are going to think about all these freebies you get? Hundreds, scores of thousands. You get suits, you get spectacles, you get boxes in to watch football, and you've cut the old age pensioners' allowance for heating. And if you watch his face, I'm going to put up, I'm going through this actually, hopefully on Friday, and I'm going to put up some clips of that interview with an overview. You're dealing with a man who is not right in the head. He doesn't understand. Now, if you were caught with your hand in the till, 99% of Englishmen would go, it's a fair cop. I've had my hand in the till. I'm caught red-handed. I'm on camera stuffing my pockets with shit, wouldn't you? You go, yeah, well, it's a fair cop. He honestly doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. He stared at Laura Cheeseburger and said, just a minute. No, I've declared this, and I didn't. I put that in the wrong column, and this is how it works. This man is a dreadful individual, even by political standards. But he doesn't think he's dreadful because he's a sociopath. And I can tell you something else. Nearly every senior politician, or a politician that holds senior office, let's put it that way, or high office, is a sociopath. You have to be, because your enemy, if you're a conservative, is not in the Labour Party. He's behind you in the Conservative Party. You have to be a sociopath. You have to be a nutter to get to the top of the greasy pole. You have to be able to kick people off with clinging on by their fingernails behind you. You have to stamp on their hands. Because if that man gets up behind you, he'll knife you in between the shoulder blades. That's how you get to the top. It's not a meritocracy. It's who is the biggest sociopath or psychopath. They are all psychopaths.
So what's the answer? And I know that's like a quite an innocent question, really. Well, a simple question with a difficult answer. What is the answer? How do we fix the United Kingdom? Because it is fucking broke. But how do we fix it? I can't see. Like I said earlier, I don't know enough about politics, and I don't know enough about like I don't even know how to explain it. But how do we fix it? How do we fix this country of ours?
I would argue that we could, a first step, this is my own pet theory. I would make sure that nobody could stand for Parliament and sport a rosette of any kind. You would have to live in your constituency by law, or you couldn't stand. So you'd have to say, for example, here in Howden and Halton Price, or whatever, it's called now, East Yorkshire, let's call it, I would have to say, I'm Godfrey Bloom, vote for me. Here are the main things, the main 5 things I believe in. And I'd have to go around the country, go around the county to the church halls and so on, and get on the stump and say, vote for me because I believe in these things. I would make it a criminal offence to wear any yellow or brown or blue or red label because you're part of a cartel. You're part of a bad cartel, bad people conspiring against the ordinary British people. So that's number 1. So none of this vote red or vote blue, which they have in North America as well. I'd sweep that away. You have to vote for the man, and he must live in your constituency. He can't suddenly turn up from Scotland or Wales or Cornwall into Yorkshire and say, vote for me. No, you have to live there. You have to have a business where you live there, and you can show that. So you've got to be that sort of individual. I would also have, by statute, that public spending cannot increase by more than 15% of GDP. You cannot spend more money than 15% of GDP. I would then say,
this country's in so much debt.
Yeah. So because he goes on spending more than it earns all the time. And I would say that's on a macro level. On a micro level, I would say let's take the NHS, which swallows 140 billion pounds a year. The first thing I would do is say the NHS, which people seem to think they want, goodness knows why, because it's shambles. But they say, oh well, look, the deal will have to be nobody can work in the National Health Service unless they are a doctor, nurse, radiographer, physiotherapist. You must be one of those things to be paid by the NHS. We do not need diversity officers. We do not need vast HR departments, so on and so forth. You would be allowed a small budget to run your reception desk at a hospital and a small budget here, there. And, you know, this is how it used to be. If you go back to the 1950s, your entire nursing staff was headed up by the matron. The money was headed up by the dean, and your surgery was headed by the chief surgeon. And they met once a month to get together to talk about the running of the hospital. I was around in 1974, I think it was. No, wrong, 1971, but it doesn't matter. Around about 1971, when they first invented the concept of a hospital administrator. And we now have in a situation where there are thousands and thousands and thousands of the buggers, and their average wage of these people is nearly double that of a theatre nurse. Now you could sack every man jack of them, and you wouldn't feel the draft. The NHS needs organisation. We need to get rid of the criminal neglect when it comes to procurement. And my sister, my younger sister, worked for Norwich Infirmary, and she said we spend twice as much money on a mattress that I could buy online, the same mattress online for half the price. I've spoken when I was in office because Smith and Nephew are up here to directors of Smith and Nephew, big drug companies, and they say we charge the NHS anything we like, but we're a business. We've got shareholders. So you can go in to a chemist and buy paracetamol at half the price that the NHS pay under procurement. Yeah. And that runs through the whole thing. The whole thing is corrupt, as everything the government does is corrupt. So there are major steps you could do day one. And and people say, oh, it's not been tried, or you couldn't do that. That's how we used to live. Look at Beveridge. Look at the Beveridge Report of 1943, which was the forerunner, or was the runner for the welfare state, which I don't hold no brief for at all. I think it's a bad thing. I think it's a cancer of the soul of the nation. But let's park that just for a moment. Beveridge, the idea of Beveridge in 1943 was that it was a safety net for people who fell on bad times and hard times through no fault of their own. Absolutely no fault of their own. It was a safety net. We now have a lifestyle choice. It's a lifestyle choice, and it's come one, come all. Oh, you've just come in from Nigeria and you're pregnant with twins. You just go straight into a maternity clinic where no charge, nobody actually sends you a bill, and you go back to Nigeria. It's happening all the time. I'm not having a pop at Nigerians. If they can get free health by getting on a plane and coming over here, I'd do the same thing too. But you cannot run a health service, which is why it's broken. It's a shambles. Yeah. And every member of the middle class now, and I can give you a name, I could give you names of people who need, say, a hip replacement. All my middle class friends who needed a hip replacement, and I could think of 4 names off the top of my head, had to go private. It's 15 grand at a London clinic, and they've been paying NHS stamps all their lives. But when you really need the NHS, if you get knocked over by a car and you're blue lighted somewhere, you'll be fine. That side of life is still good. Anything else you can whistle Dixie for. Try and get an appointment with a GP. Or GP who can spare you more than 8 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, and I'll be honest, I live in like the southeast Northumberland, and there's not many people live here. You know what I mean? So I've not experienced all the waiting.
You won't. This is a big city problem. This is an urban problem. I know your part of the world quite well, and I love it. And of course, you're very much better off. You happen to live somewhere nobody else lives. It's going to work then, isn't it? But life isn't like that, is it? Really?
No, it isn't. No, I mean, and I can only go by what I've experienced myself. And I know guys who live in like London and Birmingham and places like that, and the trouble they're having to get treatment, and not just normal treatment. I mean, treatment for, the mental health problems you have after leaving the army. Which I've been through myself slightly. And when I spoke to my doctor, and she says, well, as soon as she found out I was, a veteran, I don't even like that word, to be honest. It makes me feel old. They put me onto the Op Courage, and I got fast tracked and stuff like that. And I literally said to her, yeah, I was in the army and we're all fucked. And she totally agreed. And she actually said it back to me. She goes, yeah, you lot are all fucked because you never got looked after. Nobody, the government didn't look after you. You just walked out the door and you were gone. And you deserve more than what you've got. And after the big charities, of the funding's been taken away from them, so they're dropping, and there's people are still requiring help out there, and there's all the smaller charities that are walking with the wounded, combat stress to a degree, and it's the smaller organizations and associations that are actually helping people. They're not getting the help from the NHS where they should be, but because the NHS can't deal with them. And that's the bad side. That's the bad side that I've experienced.
You will do. You will do. I've had a lot to do because I wanted to give my attendance allowances, which were generous when I was a member of the European Parliament, to military charities. I thought I've got to start with military charities. And I dug down, what about this charity? What about that charity? And 1 or 2 other smaller charities. And I won't name names or go into detail because I don't want to particularly gratuitously upset anybody. Nearly every major military charity has more money than they know what to do with. They've got millions, so their executives get paid more. It's inefficient. In the old days, in the old British Army, your regimental associations would look after you. They would be run by retired officers and senior NCOs of your old regiment, and they knew exactly who needed help, who was swinging the lead, and all these other things that go with humankind, and the military is no different. So now that's gone, and other things that have gone are crown exemption, for example, which means that was when the beginning of a soldier is just another punter. You might work in a bank, you might work in a shop. You're no longer, you're just a soldier, but you have no special needs, special anything. All right. That's the problem. And that started with that. And these charities, they're all the same, big ones. I mean, the British Heart Foundation. I used to raise money for the British Heart Foundation, quite a lot of money years ago, before I got married. That's how long ago it was. And the regional directors were ex-army in the main. You could tell they had shiny shoes and British Army warms. And one ex-retired brigadier was paid on top of a brigadier's salary, somewhere in the region by the British Heart Foundation of 30,000 a year, which was a lot of money in those days. Do you know what he said to me? I call it my BMW money. I call it my BMW money. This guy was a complete arsehole. And it's the same with all these charities. Everybody's on the average. Before this I've got a golden rule here, which your viewers might like. If the chief executive of a charity earns more money than you do, don't give them a penny, because they obviously don't need it. Don't give them. If the chief executive earns more than you, you've no right to give your family's money to him. And they all earn more than you, Frankie.
Yeah.
They all earn more than you do.
I agree with you.
They earn more than me. And I'm supposed to be a reasonably high earner because I'm still in business. But they earn more than me. I don't earn as much as the chief executive of Oxfam, or Save the Children, or the Red Cross, or anywhere close.
I mean, the way I've been told is that the British Legion's got millions of pounds.
They have. They've now recruited at £60,000 a year, Frankie, a diversity officer. The British Legion, I haven't bought a poppy since. I'm not giving them my money to employ diversity officers. Bollocks.
Why do they need a fucking diversity officer?
God knows.
I mean, it's like, again, going back to that guy I was talking about before, Tim Davies. He was ex-RAF. He was the chief flight instructor for Tornadoes. And he's been very vocal about the way the RAF did their diversity. And then
Tim, what's his name again?
Tim Davies.
I think he's been on my channel.
Probably. He's a lovely bloke. We
got on like a house on fire. Yeah, he's on my channel. An interview with him. You'll find it on my website. Anybody who's interested. It was a no holds barred bloody interview. I can tell you that.
I can imagine. And I mean, he was quite reserved when I was talking to him. But he's also quite motivational, like yourself. You know, he motivated me that much. I did my dishes, and which had been sat there for days.
What's the point of having a Ukrainian girlfriend if you're doing your own dishes?
She doesn't live with me. You see, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to let any of that. She'll kill us.
I'm married to a Polish girl, and she does the bloody dishes.
They're crazy. I must admit.
She might be listening downstairs.
Yeah, I must admit they've got a very different way of thinking than what we have. Right, Godfrey, I'm going to have to.
Yeah, that was good. That was fun.
We've been on for another 5 minutes there.
Yeah, we have.
Honestly, thank you for coming on. I've
Great
really,
pleasure.
really enjoyed it. Pity about the hiccup halfway through, but I'll deal with that.
Well, bolt it together, it'll be all right.
Yeah, honestly, I'm lost for words. I really am. I could sit here and go on for all day.